One student, whom I'll call Pete, really wanted to learn the game. He was willing to spend as much time as possible practicing and memorizing correct play and proper card counting. He visited me in Vegas some years ago, and I remember him calling me and inviting me to dinner at the Horseshoe Club. He was staying at a strip hotel, but was playing at the Horseshoe because of their single deck game. Pete had taken a beating at the Horseshoe playing Blackjack and was comped to their steakhouse, so he asked me to join him. Pete was a little over normal height, I'd say about 5'10", with broad shoulders. He was a good-looking guy from New York and told me that years ago he had fought in the Golden Gloves as a middleweight. He still looked in good shape, though he was now a light heavyweight and someone I wouldn't want to get into the ring with. I guessed he was in his late 30s at the time. He was waiting for me outside the restaurant, dressed informally, but wearing a sports jacket and a thin gold chain around his neck. Clothes looked good on him. We shook hands and waited for the maitre d' to show us to a booth. He ordered a couple of imported beers for us, leaned back and looked me over. "How'd you hear about me?" I asked. "Did you read one of my books?" "I'm not much for reading, to tell you the truth. Someone in Brooklyn told me to look you up. I know Sally Pops." It was a name from long ago, a connected guy who had been represented by my father, who had practical law in Brooklyn. I nodded. "Well, he heard I was going to Vegas and he said, 'Look, add up if you want to be a winner.'" "That was nice of him," I said. "How's he doing?" "Fair, just fair." Pete didn't elaborate and I didn't ask any more questions. The waiter came over with our beers and we ordered dinner. Both of us had shrimp cocktail and steaks. When the waiter left, we started talking about Blackjack. "How you doing?" I asked. "Not too good. I try and get on a rush and then end up getting killed. What I do is double my bet after a win, sometimes triple it. I get a little rush going and then, boom, the GD cards go against me." Well, I nodded. "I think I play a good game, but I don't know. I'm down a few grand already." "What stakes are you playing?" "I stick to the quarter table. I'll go up to $50. Sometimes, but I bet more when I'm on a streak. A winning streak. When I lose a hand, I go back to $25. So what do you think?" The waiter brought us shrimp cocktails and another round of beers. "Do you know the game cold?" "I used to think so, but to tell the truth, I don't know anymore." "Okay, Pete, you mind if I ask you a couple of questions?" "Go ahead." "You're dealt an A6 and the dealer shows a 3. What do you do?" "Hit." "You're dealt a 7-3 for 10 and the dealer shows a queen. Double down." "You have an A6 and the dealer shows a 7. Hit." "How am I doing?" Pete asked. "The last one you got right. When you hold a soft 17, you're either going to hit it or double down depending on the dealer's up card. You should double down against the dealer's 2 through 6 with that soft 17. He nodded. "And you don't double down a 10 against a 10 if the dealer is holding a 20. All you can hope for is a push. And you're doubling your bet on a bad proposition." He nodded, chewing on a shrimp. "What you want to do is master basic strategy and then learn a counting system. Do you know about counting?" "Yeah, somewhat. If the aces are out of the deck, it's no good for you. The same with the tens." "Well, tens are going to constantly come up in the course of a game. You want to count them in relation to the small cards, 3 through 6s. He was willing to learn, and I told him it would take several hours or maybe less. Pete was in for the weekend, and this was already Friday night. I knew he was dying to get back to the tables, but I told him to be patient. We left the Horseshoe, and I drove back to my apartment near UNLV. I made some coffee and cleared a table, took out a deck of cards, and started dealing hands. What I want you to do is be patient, I said. I'll deal to you until you have things pat. You already know some of the correct moves, and I can tell you want to play aggressively, so that's in your favor. How long will it take? As long as it takes. I'll tell you when you're ready. You have to be patient, Pete. I had a guy from Hollywood visit me a couple of months ago. He's a producer, small time. We practiced for about an hour and he got bored. He knew it all, he told me, though I could see he was still making mistakes and didn't know how to count cards. So he went out and lost everything. You've got to remember, Pete, the casinos make a fortune from blackjack. They stack the rules in their favor, but the game can be beaten. It takes knowledge and self-discipline and luck. Luck is going to even itself out in the long run. I won't be here in town for the long run. No, but you'll be here long enough. Shall we begin? I dealt out cards at random and asked him what moves he'd make. Then I changed the format by dealing specific hands to specific dealer cards. For example, I put out the deuce as the dealer's up card and showed an ace, 2, and all subsequent soft hands, and asked Pete what he'd do in each instance. That is, stand, hit, or double down. From soft hands, I switched to hard hands. Then I did the same thing with the 3 up card and the 4 up card, all the way to the dealer's 10 value and ace up cards. In this way, I went through every possible combination except for pairs. It took him a couple of hours to get the correct feel of the game. Pete was fortunate in that numbers came easily to him. He told me that he had an uncle who was a bookmaker in New Jersey, and he'd help him out during the football season. He was at home with numbers and odds. We next concentrated on pairs, which did we split and which didn't we split. We took a break here and I drove him back to his hotel. Then the next morning I picked him up and took him out for breakfast and back to my place. We reviewed what had been gone over the night before, then worked the pairs. I showed him the rationale behind the decisions. For example, we split 9s against an 8 because all we have is a potential tie, whereas we stand with the 9s against the dealer 7 because we have a potential win. Next, I showed him how to count using a simple system, balancing the 3s through 6s with 10 value cards and keeping a separate count of the aces. When more aces than normal were in the deck, he was to bet more, especially with a plus or favorable count. Then I started dealing cards using a random deck, and he made bets from 2 units neutral down to 1 minus and up to 4, 5, or 6 plus values. When we had dinner the other night, you told me you automatically doubled up after every win and got my clock cleaned. That's because whether you win or lose a hand has no bearing on the next hand you play. What is important is the count, showing you whether the deck is favorable, neutral, or unfavorable. Now, here's the thing. It's unusual for a non-counter to lower his bet after a win, so don't do it. And it's usual to raise a bet after a win. If the deck is favorable, triple your bet. They won't care, but don't do that after a losing hand. You'll draw heat. So let's say you win the first hand and the deck is minus. Keep the same bet out there. If the deck is favorable Add a couple of units to your bet. If the deck is neutral, add 1 unit. You like to play aggressively, and I don't want to cramp your style. And if I lose the first hand and the deck is minus, then bet the minimum. That's okay with the floor man. We practice counting and playing and betting according to the count, changing not only betting strategies, but playing strategies as the count changed. We broke for lunch, and Pete went back to his hotel for a nap. I met him that evening at the Horseshoe, and he went to a $25 minimum table while I stood a bit back from him. There were 2 other players at the table. Pete followed my instructions exactly, taking $1,000 from the dealer in quarter chips and starting out by betting 2. The dealer was hot, and before a half hour passed, Pete was down 500. Then in a little while, he had 200 left. With a new dealer, he clawed his way up to 600. Then he went bad again and left the table with 400. We took a walk to let him cool off. I feel confident, Pete said. I can beat the game. I just had a run of bad luck. We went back to the Horseshoe, and Pete cashed in another $1,000 at a $25 table. He won a few hands, and after a half hour was up about 300. At the next table, a young dealer stood with his arms crossed. In front of him was an empty table with a sign reading $100 minimum. Pete got up and sat at the table, handing his chips to the dealer. Change color, he told the dealer. He was given 13 $100 checks. Pete stacked and restacked them and put out 2. The dealer shuffled up the cards, burned 1, and dealt Pete a blackjack. Pete left 3 checks on the table and won the next hand, and so it went. Pete was ahead almost 5,000 when another man sat at the table, a beefy guy with a red face, who asked for a marker for $5,000. "How's it going?" he asked Pete. "I'm almost even. Last night I dropped close to $6,000. That was for the floorman's ears." I had rehearsed this type of response in my apartment. "You've always lost the night before or at a different shift." That was the line. "You play here?" "Yeah, I like the stakes here. Maybe this floor guy will comp me." The floor man, who had been standing nearby, sprang to attention. "What's your name, sir?" Pete gave him a name. "Are you staying here?" "No." "Make that comp for 2. My friend here is hungry." The floor man looked me over. I guess I looked somewhat familiar, but I saw he couldn't really place me. He handed the comp to Pete. The other player was terrible, a degenerate gambler, betting on hunches. Once with the deck as bad as it could be for the players, he put down 1,500 and stood on a 16 against the dealer's 5. The dealer turned over a 3, got another 3, and then a 6 for 17. The guy signed another $5,000 marker. Pete, meanwhile, was winning more. The floor man, to test him, had the dealer shuffle up after Pete had won a $600 bet. Following my previous instructions, Pete kept the bet intact and won again. By the time we packed it in for dinner, Pete had cashed in $12,000 worth of profits. We went to the steakhouse and had a leisurely steak dinner. How am I doing?" Pete asked. "Doing real well. I feel good. I'm going to play $1,000 and a hand next. I got close to $20,000. I'm going to bury them." "Pete, anything can happen in this short run." "No kidding. That's why I'm going to take a shot." We took another walk after dinner, then we're back at the Horseshoe. It was a bit after 10 in the evening. The beefy guy was no longer around. Pete spoke to a floorman. He wanted a $1,000 minimum table to himself. "No problem." After the sign was put up, a crowd gathered behind Pete. He winked at me, then put out $20,000 in bills. A floor man plus the pit boss was behind the dealer. This time it was an Asian woman who brusquely shuffled up. Pete put out 2 chips, $2,000. He was going to bet as though these were $25 checks. Start off with 2, go up to 4 or 5, and down to 1 depending on the count. How you doing? Pete asked the dealer. She didn't respond and she didn't even smile. All business. Pete picked up his cards. He held an 8 and 7. The dealer showed a king. Pete hit, got a queen, and busted. The dealer had a 10 in the hole. Pete reduced his bet to 1 check and managed a push with a hard 18. He got another push on the next hand with a hard 17. Still betting 1 check, he lost the next hand 19 to 20. The deck was pretty bad and he lost another check. Then pushed the dealer, reshuffled. So far, it had cost Pete $4,000. He hadn't even come close to winning. With the new deck, Pete bet 2 checks. The dealer got a blackjack, then a 20. Then Pete finally won. But already 3 aces were out of the deck, and he bet just 1 check. He lost that one. Pushed, lost, pushed. $4,000 more lost. The dealer reshuffled again. With $8,000 left, Pete bet 2 checks on the new deck. He lost with a 17 against the dealer's 18. Betting 1 check, he pushed. He pushed again, then lost again. The dealer wasn't reshuffling, and Pete now had 4 checks left. He bet a check and won, then lost a 1 check bet. The woman reshuffled. She stood there, unsmiling, erect, her hands flying around the cards. Pete played with the 4 decks. Then, after she burned the top card, he put out 2 checks and lost. His 18 shorter than her 19. 2 checks left. With the count at 2, he hesitated and she waited, her hands high in the air holding the deck. Finally, Pete put out 1 check and got 8s. The dealer showed a 10. The correct play here was to split the 8s. You always split 8s and aces to reduce your losses overall. Can I surrender? Pete asked the dealer. She looked to the floor man. The floor man spoke up for her. We don't allow surrender. So Pete split the 8s. He got a 5 on the first 8 and pointed at the cards for another hit. He was dealt a jack and the dealer swept the cards and his check off the table. I could see a trace of a smile on her face. Oh, then. She was thinking, another loser in a city of losers. Pete took a deep breath and pointed at the other 8. He got a deuce. Big card, he said softly. He got a 7. Now he had 2 stand. The dealer turned her whole card over. It was a 4. She hit and busted with a 9. The cards were reshuffled. I looked around me. The crowd had thinned out, with only a few people still watching Pete play, while a security guard stood nearby.